both on this old house and the new Yankee workshop for years.
For 21 years, a man in a plaid shirt and a pair of safety glasses stood in a small wood-paneled shop outside Boston and did something almost nobody does on television anymore. He built things. Slowly, carefully, with his own two hands, on camera. No cutaways, no stunt doubles, no confetti when the project was finished. Just sawdust, patience, and the real reason the new Yankee D a finished piece of furniture at the end of 22 minutes. That man was Norm Abram, and the show was the new Yankee Workshop. When it went off the air in 2009, it wasn't struggling. It wasn't losing viewers. Nobody at PBS was trying to cancel it. And yet one of the most trusted names in American television walked away from a program that still had every reason to keep running. So what actually happened? The answer isn't scandalous, but it is human, and it says something about what 21 years of doing real work, for real, does to a person. A workshop built on one man's credibility. To understand why the show ended, it helps to understand what made it different in the first place. The new Yankee Workshop premiered in January 1989, a spin-off dreamed up by producer Russell Morash, the same man behind This Old House. Morash had spent years watching Norm Abram work as the master carpenter on that program, and he saw something worth building an entire show around, not just Norm's skill with a chisel, but his ability to explain what he was doing in a way that made even complicated joinery feel within reach. So Morash built him a stage. Tucked behind Morash's own property in Massachusetts sat a 936-square-foot workshop, stocked with the kind of tool collection most hobbyists could only dream about. It became the show's permanent set, its home base for 2 full decades. The format never really changed, because it never needed to. Norm would introduce a project, a blanket chest, a Windsor chair, a shaker side table, often visiting a historic home or landmark connected to the style first. Then he'd head back to the shop and build the piece from start to finish, walking viewers through every cut and every joint along the way. No shortcuts, no stand-ins, no here's one we made earlier. Airing on PBS meant the show never had to chase ratings with gimmicks. There was no elimination round, no guest celebrity dropping by to add star power. In a television landscape that was steadily getting louder, the new Yankee Workshop stayed quiet, and that quietness became the whole appeal. People didn't just tune in to learn how to cut a dovetail. They tuned in because watching someone who was simply excellent at his craft, working without pretense, was its own kind of relief. By the early 1990s, the show had become a fixture of Saturday morning television. Over its full run, Norm and the crew completed roughly 235 projects on camera, everything from simple shop jigs to elaborate period reproductions, outdoor structures, and even a sailboat. Woodworking instructors reported new students showing up specifically because of the show. Tool retailers noticed sales patterns that tracked with new episodes airing. Norm Abram had become, almost by accident, one of the most influential figures in American craft of his generation. But none of that explains why the show ended. For that, you have to look past what audiences saw and into what it actually took to make 22 minutes of television look that effortless. What the camera never showed. Every project on the new Yankee Workshop represented somewhere between 40 and 60 hours of work before a single frame made it to air. That included sourcing the right lumber, often specific species cut to exact dimensions, long before any cutting began. It meant figuring out how to translate a multi-day build into a television-friendly sequence, which steps to show in full, which to compress, how to frame each cut, so the process read clearly on screen. And at the center of it all, Norm still had to actually build the thing. That distinction mattered more than casual viewers probably realized. Norm wasn't performing carpentry for the cameras. He was doing the work, in real time, with real consequences if a cut went wrong or joint didn't fit. He had one assistant on set, mostly handling cleanup and finishing work, but the woodworking itself, the actual skill people tuned in to watch, belonged entirely to him. There was no second version quietly swapped in if something went sideways. If a piece didn't fit, Norm fixed it, on camera, in front of everyone. That authenticity is part of what made the show resonate. People who knew woodworking could tell instantly that what they were watching was real. People who didn't know the craft could still sense the difference between someone demonstrating a skill and someone who had spent a lifetime mastering it. But that same commitment came at a cost. During active production seasons, the new Yankee workshop wasn't a side project. It regularly demanded 40 to 60 hours a week of Norm's time. And he wasn't doing it in isolation. At the same time, he was still filming This Old House, an entirely separate production with its own schedule. For years, Norm was effectively holding down two demanding television jobs simultaneously. On This Old House, he was one contributor among many, sharing the workload with a full crew of tradespeople. On the new Yankee workshop, he was the designer, the builder, the teacher, and the host all at once. Every episode depended on him showing up and doing the work from start to finish. Then there was the workshop floor itself, bare concrete, no cushioning, nothing built. Stretch, not for a few weeks of a single season, but across more than 2 decades of them. Season after season, his body absorbed the impact of standing, lifting, bending, and repeating the same physical motions thousands of times over. None of that strain ever made it into the final cut. Norm never let it show. But it was there, quietly accumulating, long before anyone outside his immediate circle knew about it. The toll nobody saw coming. By 2009, Norm Abram was approaching 60 years old, with 2 decades of demanding physical labor behind him in a shop for comfort. During filming, Norm stood on that floor for 8 to 12 hours at was built for craft, not comfort. The effects didn't appear overnight. They built gradually, the way repetitive strain always does, until they became impossible to keep ignoring. Years of repetitive sawing, chiseling, and sanding had left him with persistent joint pain. His back carried the accumulated strain of bending over workbenches and lifting heavy lumber for 2 decades. And standing for hours at a time on an unpadded concrete floor had led to plantar fasciitis that had become a chronic, ongoing issue rather than an occasional ache. None of it showed on screen. That was simply consistent with who Norm was. He didn't use the show as a venue to complain, and the final seasons looked just as unhurried and careful as the earliest ones. But behind the scenes, conversations had already started. Quiet discussions between Norm, Russell Morash, and WGBH Boston about what continuing the show would actually require of him going forward. This wasn't a story about the show failing. It was still popular, still profitable, still fully backed by its network. The real question wasn't whether the new Yankee workshop still worked. It clearly did. The question was what it was costing Norm personally to keep it going, and whether that cost was still worth paying. Norm's decision, on his own terms. When the ending finally came, it was entirely Norm's call. That detail matters, because in the years since, plenty of rumors have circulated about behind-the-scenes disputes, about network pressure, about the show quietly losing its audience. None of it holds up. Everyone close to the production has said the same thing consistently. There was no external push. The show wasn't cancelled. It was concluded, deliberately, by the person at the center of it. Norm addressed the decision directly and without drama at the time, describing 2 decades of building demanding projects, meeting fellow woodworkers, and receiving steady support from millions of viewers, and framing the ending simply as the natural close to a great run, with no grievances attached. Russell Morash, who had produced the show from its very first episode, put it plainly: the program couldn't continue without Norm. There was no version of the new Yankee workshop that made sense with someone else standing at that workbench. It wasn't a format that could be handed off to a successor. It was one specific person doing one specific thing in one specific way, and the decision to end it was inseparable from Norm's decision about his own body and his own life. There was also a quieter, less discussed piece of the story. Norm had projects of his own waiting. He'd built his own timber-framed colonial home in Carlisle, Massachusetts, years earlier. But details had gone unfinished because the show consumed so much of his time and energy every production cycle. Ending the new Yankee workshop wasn't Norm stepping away from woodworking. It was making room to finally do it for himself, without a camera crew, a shooting schedule, or the pressure of being the entire foundation of a television production. On October 16, 2009, WGBH Boston made it official. No further episodes of the new Yankee workshop would be produced. There was no farewell special, no dramatic final episode built around saying goodbye. It ended the way Norm had always worked, quietly, without unnecessary ceremony, with everything that needed to be said already said. How fans reacted. The announcement still landed as a genuine surprise, even among viewers who followed the show closely. It wasn't that people expected it to run forever. Most long-running programs eventually end. What caught people off guard was the absence of any warning signs. No dip in quality, no rumors of trouble behind the scenes, no farewell-tinged final season. The show had simply been doing what it always did, and then, one day, it stopped. Woodworking forums and message boards filled up almost immediately. Fine Woodworking magazine, which had covered the show for its entire run, reported reader response unlike anything they'd seen for a piece of television news. People weren't just disappointed about losing a program. They were writing the kind of messages you write about something that had genuinely become part of the rhythm of their week. Longtime woodworkers credited the show with reviving a passion they'd nearly let go of. Beginners described how Norm's patient, methodical instruction gave them the confidence to attempt their first real project. Some parents wrote about watching episodes with their kids who, now adults, still remembered which builds they'd watched together on Saturday mornings. What that response revealed was something ratings numbers had always hinted at but never fully captured. The show hadn't just entertained people. It had shaped how they spent their time, what they valued, and how they thought about making things with their own hands. That's a rare outcome for any television program, and rarer still for one that never relied on drama or self-promotion to hold an audience. And notably, there wasn't much anger in the response. There was grief, but it was the respectful kind. The kind that comes from understanding that someone gave what they had to give. Even without knowing the specifics of Norm's physical toll, most viewers seemed to sense that asking for more would have been unreasonable. What the show left behind. The legacy of the new Yankee workshop is hard to measure precisely, partly because the show never asked for attention while it was running. It didn't generate headlines or controversy. It simply showed up, week after week, for 21 seasons, and taught people how to build things. The 235 projects Norm completed on camera remain just as relevant today as when they first aired: Shaker furniture, Windsor chairs, blanket chests, bookcases, period reproductions. These are enduring forms precisely because they are honest, built without ornamentation covering up poor joinery, designed to last generations rather than impress for a single season. Norm didn't just show people how to build those pieces. He explained why they were worth building in the first place, which is a deeper and more lasting kind of teaching. The measured drawings sold alongside the show gave viewers a direct path from watching to doing. Thousands of people built Norm's exact projects in their own shops, and some of those pieces are now sitting in their second generation of family ownership, real objects, in real homes, that exist because a PBS carpenter took the time to show exactly how they were made. In January 2023, more than 13 years after the show ended, Russell Morash announced that every episode was now available for free on YouTube. The response was immediate. A new generation of viewers, many in their 20s and 30s, discovering the show for the first time, responded with the same quiet admiration audiences had shown decades earlier. People described staying up late binge-watching episodes, ordering their first set of chisels after a single build, and calling it some of the calmest content they'd found anywhere online. More than a decade off the air, the show was still doing exactly what it always did, making people want to go build something. Life after the workshop. Ending the new Yankee workshop didn't mean Norm Abram stepped away from television or from woodworking. He continued appearing on This Old House, where his role was far more sustainable, contributing expertise and demonstrations as part of a larger team rather than carrying an entire production on his own. For the first time in years, he also had room for his own projects, including finishing details on his timber-framed home in Carlisle that he'd never had time to complete while the show was running. He continued writing, using the same clear, practical teaching style that had defined his television career. In 2016, he appeared in Felled, a documentary about repurposing fallen urban trees, a natural extension of how he'd always approached wood, as material with history and meaning.